those who haven't been to our events before with the Birmingham Architecture Association, we're also a local branch of the RRBA, and we were originally founded in 1874, though we were relaunched a couple of years ago in 2017. We're part of a group of architects, designers, artists interested in all aspects of architecture, from urban planning, social discourse, and we're hopefully reflecting the voice of the West Midlands architectural community, as well as sort of wide on a national scale. Thanks to lockdown, we've been able to contact a lot more people. And we're just generally trying to celebrate and champion great architecture and people across all spectrums and ages of careers. So if you are interested, do email us at baa@bomarchitecture.com. For all our newsletters, and check out our website or Eventbrite for any past or future events or past recordings and social media. So tonight's event will be recorded and available on our website and in the next week or so, and we're also hoping to hear from you, and if you have any events or activities you'd like to see, then we're more than happy for being open for ideas. And at the start of the month, we did a whole week of celebrating women in architecture for for International Women's Day, through an exhibition and a week of events, including employment lawyer and looking at parenting in architecture. So if there's anything interested in that, do check out our website. We've also just announced our Cordial Creative Award exhibition, which is a big competition that we've been holding over the last year, and we'll be relaunching that this year. And tonight we are with, sorry, my screen's playing up. We are with, oh, you know, I've just totally ruined Zoom, that's fine. We're here with our sponsors tonight, thanks to our patron sponsors, Anna Muir, All Good, Outro, Ibstock Brick, Kitchen Gallery, Milliken, Rayners and Taylor Maxwell. And we are here tonight with the Future Architects Network. We've got Charlie Edmonds here, who's an architectural designer, he's a researcher and is a master of philosophy in sort of the realm of architecture and urban design at the University of Cambridge. So thank you very much, guys. Have I not been sharing my screen?
No.
Tell me I wasn't sharing my screen.
I was just so captured in your introduction.
I'm so professional tonight, I'm so sorry. Trust me, it's a really beautiful presentation. Yeah, and it had some beautiful pictures in it, and it even had your Charlie's face there, so apologies for that.
Oh, this was a good malfunction then in that case.
I even prepared everything. I was like, no technical issues, no malfunctions, but I'm the one that's ruined it, so there you are. Anyway, Future Architects Front is a grassroots organisation campaign for the end of exploitation of young people in architecture. And their open letter to RIBA has been really well received and quite controversial in some areas, having over 1,800 signatures, sorry.
Give it a couple of weeks.
Yeah, it's pretty good over the last few weeks. And outlining all those different issues, and we will now hand over to Charlie shortly for him to go over. And just as a quick intro, we've also got our panelists here. We've got Carl Conway, who's a BCU Masters Part 2 student, who's also one of our BAA student ambassadors. We've got Tegan Robinson Morris, who's also here as one of our BAA student ambassadors and also MR Part 2 at BCU. And both of them have got lots of different experience in all different realms of architecture. And we've also got Simeon, who is our champion youth lead engagements officer and ex-RRBA counsellor. So he's got, student counsellor, sorry, not actual counsellor, on the national board, and many other really successful and very sort of high prestige accolades. So I shall hand over to Charlie now to introduce the Future Architects Front. And apologies again for ruining the presentation at the beginning.
No worries, no worries. I'm sure I can up the game in terms of malfunctions. Just give me a chance. Something will go horrifically wrong. But optimistically, here we go. Visible to everyone? All good? Great. Okay, there we go. Now, yeah, so thanks for inviting me to talk here, everyone. So I suppose the sort of goal of this from my end is to maybe, for those who have not heard of Future Architects Front, or FAF as I like to call it, I can do a little bit of an introduction as to who we are and what we're doing. And for those of us who are already familiar, hopefully I can give you a little bit of a peek behind the curtain as to how we have sort of progressed and worked as a group over the last couple of months. So the first question I suppose I should address is, who are we? And that's not a very easy question to answer, because depending on who you speak to, you'll probably get different responses. So, you might hear we're an Instagram account. You might hear we're a think tank or a research group. You might hear we're campaigners and letter writers. You might hear that we're a meme page and we just poke fun at people and make jokes all day. And typically my way of answering this sort of question of, who are we and what do we do, is usually I just say yes to whatever is sort of proffered to us. And this has worked pretty well so far, because the great thing about organizing in an online fashion these days is that you don't really need to fit a niche. You can be a little bit amorphous, and you can sort of play a multitude of roles depending on what's needed at the time. So I've sort of just tried to embrace our informality and not worry too much about sort of what we are. But in terms of who we are, I suppose maybe the best way to talk about that would be to say that in a couple of different ways, we're young. So as individuals making up FAF, we're all young, I like to think. And as a group, we're definitely young, because the very first time that FAF was thought into existence was the 30th of January. So our entire being as a group is barely a couple of months old, which is very strange to think about as someone who's been involved in it from the start. So yeah, I think our sort of defining feature at the moment is youth in a lot of ways. Now, what have we done? What is the sort of effect of what we've done? What is the controversy, I suppose? So essentially, FAF began as a group of architectural assistants, students, young professionals in architecture, kind of all having the sense that I think probably everyone in this call today has felt, which is that there's something not working, there's something wrong with the sort of structure of the profession, from education to practice to our institutions. And so the first thing that we decided to do was to sort of try and validate this sense that we had through research. So the first thing that we did was we put together a survey which was answered by about 166 people. And the survey essentially tried to sort of get the temperature of the profession on a number of important questions. So percentage of people employed, for one, was particularly important. Also, the sort of overwhelming abundance of unpaid overtime that we see throughout the profession. We found that 88.6% of people who had answered our survey had worked unpaid overtime. And if you've seen the more recent AJ investigation, our numbers fairly consistently match up with the AJ's investigation as well. We also asked if people's salary allowed them to live comfortably. We asked if architectural assistants had seen vacancies for what are essentially graduate positions that are asking for many years of experience. We asked if people had felt exploited by their employer while in practice. And perhaps most tellingly, Do You Feel Supported by Reba, which received a 95.8% no from the people surveyed. So this was all interesting, but at the same time, we didn't want to just make this a sort of quantitative exercise. We wanted to actually give people a space to share their stories and their experiences. And so, in addition to gathering this data, we also allowed people a space where they could write their experience and tell us about something that had happened to them in practice, or sort of what had been their sort of impression of work as an architectural assistant. And we received 120 different stories, which filled 10 pages. And the content of these experiences were as bleak as you may expect from the sort of content of our campaign. And what we tried to do was, rather than sort of, beat a topical dead horse of just sort of shouting from the rooftops, things are bad, we tried to sort of take the implicit suggestions and the positives that were included in some of these stories, and we tried to boil those down into 5 demands about what could be done from an institutional level to address some of these problems, some of these systemic issues that we were seeing in the profession. And so what we ended up with was a call to end unpaid overtime, to have greater oversight for the role of the architectural assistant, to have greater transparency in REBA's budget and spending, to campaign for a more representative governing body, and to ensure accountability for exploitative practices. And so this kind of formed the framework and the structure of what became the REBA open letter. And so this was the letter that we wrote, which tried to capture the sentiment and the call for change that was expressed to us in those 120 experiences. And the writing of the letter was essentially trying to take all of the sort of collective will for change, the collective experience that we had heard from, and formulate that into one succinct letter. And this was kind of the first point that our work at FAF snowballed into something much larger than we had expected, because within the space of a couple of weeks, we'd reached over 1,800 signatures. And the only reason we closed the signatures was just because we wanted to actually send the letter. So that number could have potentially kept going up for a long time, but practically we had to send it eventually. So we closed it after 1,800. And this was when we started to sort of pop up in different on sort of larger institutions and media's radar, because the sort of momentum that started to build behind the letter was certainly far more than what we had expected. And interestingly, one of the factors that I personally think we can thank for the attention that this campaign got wasn't just the research, wasn't just the writing, but it was also the memes. Because what was effective from a campaigning point of view about these sort of lighthearted, maybe lowbrow kind of jokes about the profession is that it meant that we could essentially communicate the points we were trying to make through quick, accessible, humorous channels, essentially. So if you didn't have time to read the open letter, if you didn't have time to look through the 120 experiences that we'd collected, you could come to our Instagram page, you could come to any of our online presences, and you could sort of immediately get the sense of what we were doing and why we were doing it. So, there's sort of a deeper digital media sort of debate to have about like the role of meme as criticism in the 21st century, but I'll try not to get too deep into that anymore. Suffice to say, this is what I believe was a great way of gathering support and sharing our work, specifically in the online space where we have grown. And so from memes, we went to media in the form of the AJ, who were the first sort of large publication to pick up on what we were doing. This is sort of where the campaign started to become labeled as controversial when we had an opinion piece written about us by Paul Finch that wasn't very good, to be honest. And then we also got to write a piece back to him, so that was a nice experience for us all. To be honest, Paul probably did a great job of getting our name out there even more. So in a way, thanks to Paul for that. And the most important thing that we've done, besides the jokes and the articles and that kind of thing, is that we got the attention of REBA, and we were able to meet with them very recently. And just this last Friday, I think, we published the agreements that we'd made from our first meeting with REBA. And there's a lot of really great ground that we covered. They are going to propose ending unpaid overtime in chartered practices to the board. They're going to try to bring in things like the compact to make the role of the architectural assistant more clear and more and practices more accountable. And generally, they've been, at the moment, they've been fairly open to listening to all of our suggestions and acting on them. So far, we've come a very significant way from purely being an online group to actually creating some sort of material change. And so what? What does all this matter? Well, I think it's really interesting beyond FAF to look at the wealth of sort of grassroots campaigning, grassroots movements that are going on both within and without architecture right now. We see movements like ACAN, Anthropocene Architecture School, Fame Collective, UVW SAW, the Section of Architectural Workers, all using these new digital environments and sort of grassroots organizing tactics to create change in the culture of the profession and in the system of the sort of industries and institutions that facilitate the profession. And I think there's there's a lot of potential in this in terms of organizing, like I said, the grassroots level. And so, my three sort of takeaways from what we've done, one would be to join a union, because I think it's demonstrated the power of collective action incredibly effectively. Another one would be to get political. REBA, at the end of the day, they do largely work through elections, and at the moment we have a great deal of political power as students, as we have membership for free, and we can organize and we can use that political power to shape the institute in the way that we want to see. And lastly, have fun with it. It's not all doom and gloom. You can poke fun at the problems, and in my experience, that's a great way to communicate. I feel like a lot of people who campaign try and sort of adopt the language of the people we're campaigning against, adopt that sort of like PR speak. But I really think the thing that has made FAF successful is that we've just spoken the way that people of our generation speak, and we've been unapologetic about that. And that's for me, that's why it's been working so well. And I think the clearest sort of evidence for that was that 4 days after we made our Instagram account, Reba reached out to us and made first contact 4 days after the Instagram account was made, 4 days after FAF was made. So yeah, I suppose my last message would be: do not underestimate digital organizing. Don't underestimate the potential of these spaces for young people to come together and make their collective voices heard. And I'll leave it there. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Charlie. That was really interesting, and I hope you're getting used to doing your spiel now, because I'm sure a lot of people are going to start asking you to speak and get the message out there. Equally, the BA found you on Instagram and thought, these memes are going somewhere. I think, like you sort of said, it's a really effective tool. I think, well, probably most of the people on the call are somewhere along the millennium spectrum, and it definitely got people's eye and starts engaging. And I'm glad that you're sort of unafraid to sort of go for the harder topics and sort of be sort of unapologetic in sort of and provocative. And it's been really interesting to see the kind of responses that have come back and forth from the Architects Journal, from obviously Reba following you. That's a pretty momentous thing to sort of have and be able to have had that conversation directly with them in such a short space of time. So I suppose I just want to say thanks on behalf of the community that are out there. I know there's a lot of questions coming in, and I just wanted to possibly hand over to Simeon, who is actually, he's a doctoral researcher and PhD candidate at BCU, but he also serves as the trustee of RIBA between 2016 and 2019, and he was the co-vice chair for students and associates of RIBA. And he's also the co-founder of the RIBA Future Architects Network. And also he's one of our committee members, so he's sort of perfectly placed to put out some knowledge of sort of inside tips and tricks of how the RIBA system works. And also I'm sure a few people out there might want to quiz him about some certain topics as well. So I just want to hand over to Simeon.
Thanks, Amy. I think what Charlie and Faf have done in such a short amount of time is something that I could only really dream of, and it was really, really how would I say it? It was really nice to see somebody appropriating the Future Architects name. So just a bit of background. I think when you were talking about being political, Charlie, I think this is hitting the nail. The head on the nail, or whatever. I'm not English. I don't know the expression what it is. But just a bit of background in terms of that. Students and associates, in terms of members of the RIBA, couldn't vote until 2-3 years ago. So they weren't allowed to vote for like a president. And the position I served on as a co-vice president for students and associates in the RIBA didn't exist either, maybe like 5 years ago. So when we decided to create the Future Architects network, kind of initiative or whatever, however it's branded right now, the idea was to be a sort of a platform where you can actually get to understand, or the institute could understand what younger people, or at least early career professionals, because obviously that could be a different age, think about their sort of working conditions, everything, just being as a support network, but also as a sort of a kind of channeling their voice. And it's interesting that it has just been, it's still in its pilot, and it's been in 2 years for pilot now, and I think it's now going to become part of the membership services. But what I think Charlie's really kind of understood there is that the communication strategy of what RIBA Future Architects is and is very how do I put it in a diplomatic way? Not great in that sense, as in like not having an Instagram account, things like this. I think understanding that there is a space for part 1s, part 2s, and part 3s, or at least recently chartered part 3s, to in the RIBA and to actually shape the direction of the institute is really key. And I think that hasn't been realized. And I think with FAF, that probably is changing quite rapidly. And I do really hope we're going to get in that conversation down the line of actually how maybe you can take some of the reins of the institute and actually really kind of push change in a more rapid way than how the RIBA tends to operate. And I know being a trustee for 3 years, it's a slow decision making, but it's not necessarily because of everybody who's there. It's kind of like how a culture of an institution that's 180 years old has ended up being. And I think that kind of needs to change, because otherwise it will become very quickly irrelevant. So that's one question about I have about Charlie. So how do you want to infiltrate the institute and maybe actually drive some more radical change inside there? But I don't know. I mean, maybe you probably wanted to pass to somebody else. So there you go. This is a bit of a background. So it's very new, but you're tapping in at the right time. And I just love that. And when we created the Future Architects Network, we didn't think of it as something static. We really thought of it as something dynamic, but we also didn't think of it as something that the RIBA owns. We thought of it as something that the people who are part of it, the students and the associates and those members of the RIBA that want to take charge and sort of let their voice be heard, take ownership of it. And I don't think this is currently happening within the institute. I think it's very much slowly morphing, or at least the marketing aspect of it is seen as the sort of the potential rather than the sort of the transformative aspect. And I can imagine that's probably just a sort of a self-reflection of the institute as being a very risk averse. And I think the reason they contacted you 4 days after that is probably because somebody panicked and went, we need to know these people, I need to bring them into the fold. So my other kind of comment would be, try not to get into the fold, if that makes sense. Like stay on the sidelines. Yeah, anyway, I'll give, that's my sort of background, Amy, and my little question for Charlie.
Thanks very much, Simeon. So basically you were saying burn it all to the ground.
No, because I think there is space for it, but I definitely think that we get to that, but it's not just the RIBA, it's a mixture of organizations, the ARB, the heads of schools of architecture, other sort of organizations which drive that bit. Not burn it to the ground, but definitely operate on it very dramatically, if that makes it like a heart transplant. I think it needs.
Sort of infiltrating on the periphery, sort of slowly burrowing in. Yeah, I like it. I suppose just going to ask Charlie, like, have you had any discussions or any response with ARB? Is it only, or any other organisations? Has it just been RBA?
Let's see. I think the CEO of ARB follows me on Twitter, but that's about it. We haven't got in touch with them yet. Essentially, our kind of strategy has basically, because like Simeon mentioned, the problem with any kind of campaign like ours is that you can't expect a single organization to fix everything. So what we essentially had to do was we kind of had to try and pick our early battles and figure out what can be achieved in a relatively straightforward manner. And so the reason we looked at the RIBA in particular was because they have the RIBA Chartered Practice Agreement. So they have this space where you can directly influence the standards that practices are supposed to work to. And so for making sort of relatively quick change at a very large scale within the profession, that was sort of the best strategic target for us to pick. But when we start to look at wider issues of things like education, of things like salaries, that kind of thing, then we will have to start looking across institutions and trying to facilitate these more complex industry-wide conversations. But in terms of immediate progress, RIBA made a lot of sense to us for sort of like series one of the FAF campaign, I suppose you could call it.
That definitely makes sense. Trying to sort of hit the widest and the hardest on most sort of widespread as possible, and really looking forward to seeing what else is in your sleeve for series 2, 3, 10, Game of Thrones forever, maybe, I don't know. But yeah, thank you. Carly, did you want to chip in a little bit? I know you've got a few things you wanted to ask.
Yeah, so I think well, first of all, thanks for the presentation. I think it's quite astonishing how many kind of signatures and how much engagement you got in such a short amount of time. And I imagine that kind of reading people's experience that is sent through to you, there's a lot of emotion, a lot of anger, and just kind of going forward, how is that kind of sustained, and how are you going to kind of turn that emotion, that anger, into something constructive, moving on, especially now there's kind of, you've got your foot in the door with your RBA?
Yeah, I mean, I think in a sense it's already constructive because we took that anger, we took that outpouring of emotion, and we channeled it into a formal process of writing an open letter and gathering signatures. So I think what was important that we did was we didn't sort of descend into a like a satire. Well, nothing wrong with satire, but we didn't just descend into a page that just sort of like relentlessly mocked the Reba, as much as there is part of me that would enjoy that. But we also thought about, how can we take formal processes of how to put this into a letter, bring this up, put this into policy proposals, bring this up to Reba in meetings. All of the agreements that we put out on Friday, things like ending unpaid overtime for charter practice, improving the complaints and anonymous reporting procedures at Reba, those were all things that we brought to the table. Those weren't promises that they made us. That when we met, we had these laid out and we said, these are the things that we want. So I think essentially the way forwards is to just sort of maintain that sort of balance between acknowledging and listening to people's very valid experiences and emotions, but channeling that into policy, channeling that into tangible material solutions. And I hope that's what we can keep doing. It's always impossible to say for certain anything with these kinds of campaigns, but I certainly still have a lot of energy to give, and the other people who make up FAF also definitely have a lot of energy to give. So I'm fairly optimistic.
Brilliant. Sounds promising.
Okay, I'll go next then. Thanks again, Charlie. It's actually been great to put a face to the account as well. So, question from the audience. Do you think the government kickstart scheme for 16 to 24-year-olds for part 1 will be a help or a hindrance? Some practices are advertising part 1 placements with aid from this. But do you think it will just encourage a lower wage for this?
I suppose it could help things in the short term in terms of unemployment levels, but I think that it's not something that should comfort us, because it's not a systemic change. It's sort of a it's like a plaster on something that needs more kind of serious action taken on it. So short term maybe, but long term I don't think it will really sway us at all in terms of how we see the situation.
Great. I completely agree with that. It's yeah, the idea of being paid any less than a part one already gets is terrifying.
Yeah, could I follow up with that?
Yeah, sure.
So I think almost when you look at it, and if you're looking at it with kind of your business head on, you could see why kind of people are doing it, but it's more about business and money, isn't it? It's about people and their lives essentially, which is why it's such a big ethical problem that it seems like a lot of people are kind of experiencing. But with that said, is it possible, or do you think that the RIBA could probably do more to promote the use of architects? I was in a call a couple of weeks ago with Jazz Ballot Architects, and he gives some kind of scary figures. Really low percentage of kind of construction work in the UK actually consults an architect. So you've got, you know, your big house builders that are kind of using their people inside, or maybe you've got kind of people that aren't fully qualified practicing as architects, and kind of the average Joe who might want to employ a designer to do a house extension or anything doesn't really see the value in paying an architect to do it. So do you think that that's kind of intertwined with this whole systemic issue? And do you think that maybe the RIBA could be pushed to kind of, you know, make more effort to promote architects as a profession and as, you know, people, and really show the value of it?
Yeah, I think the root of what you just described is the lack of protection of function of architects currently, because we have a protected title, but the work is not protected. So you have this issue where another reason why we have this sort of like quote unquote race to the bottom in terms of slashing fees and that kind of thing is that we not only do we have competition from within architecture, but we also have competition from developers, from people outside of the profession as well. So I think that promoting architects maybe might be a good direction that the RIBA could pursue, but I think there's a sort of larger cross-institute issue of like talking about fees, like that is one of the, you know, absolute most difficult complex topics that you can try and address, I think, right now, and it is the root of a lot of problems, but yeah, I personally think it's tied up to sort of the legal the actual like government policy and protection around like the architect, and what sort of role we've been given to play, and yes, Simeon, I feel like you are probably a better person to talk about that as me that than me, maybe, because in terms of promoting architecture from inside the RIBA, I wonder if you had a bit of an insight into how that sort of topic of like fees and things is managed.
Could you just like formulate, because I was actually preparing a question, so I didn't like follow the full thing. Like, but I think if you're talking about fee scales and things.
Yeah, fee scales, and the perceived value of architects.
I think the value of architecture is not a uniquely UK problem, and I don't think that's a conversation that my institute back in Bulgaria, the architecture one, is having. So I think the value of architects generally is a problem, because I think the value of architecture as a profession generally is at a crossroads in terms of what our function is. And I think this is linked to that post-capitalist society question that, you know, we kind of all as a society are struggling at the moment. You know, how do you continue growth without doing growth? I think though, in terms of fee scales, as a EU member, a EU citizen, the only kind of real justification, from my understanding, for fee scales being abolished was the EU anti-competitiveness legislation, which we're not part of anymore. So I think that's a conversation which MACOG and the AIB, and just generally in terms of understanding why competitive fee scales can't come back. I mean, the Lawyer Society, the lawyers have it. They have some fee scales and sort of guidance, and they're a regulated profession. So I don't understand now that we are out of the EU, if there is any internal legislation, obviously that's been brought in, but if that legislation can be changed. So yeah, I think in terms of actually talking about the profession, all the architecture, promotion architecture within the RIBA, I think there is, from my perspective, there is probably more that needs to be done on the managerial side. And I know all the people that are going to listening to this going to hate me, but I do think within the RIBA, there's a lot of elected architects and people who want to change things for the better, but there's a lot of vested interest both from within the organization and from without the organization. And I think that needs to be unpicked a lot more and kind of challenged. And I'll end it there.
Yeah, you've got some really good points, Simeon, and it goes way beyond this conversation today, and way probably above FAF, and it's a structural thing that everyone's been saying a lot of these questions for a long time, but maybe it is time to actually, now Brexit has finally happened, that it might be open for different discussions. So I suppose I was sort of thinking, let's say just at Charlie, but there's a lot of concern around if RIBA are enforcing their chartered practices to sort of pay overtime, is there going to be a potential, as people have been thinking, there's potential for people will just, all right, we'll quit being a chartered practice and we'll just be a normal architecture practice and don't need to be under that RIBA umbrella. And there's a potential that maybe the only way that it's going to work more is if there's like a naming and shaming thing of like a sort of, I know there's part of your discussions was about having some sort of anonymous reporting system. But again, I suppose people could abuse that and it's very difficult. So it's really just sort of thinking about just how much power does RIBA have, especially it would be interesting to see what it was like in those discussions with yourself more directly, Charlie, and your associates, especially my question really long, but there's sort of the ARB would typically find an individual accountable if they're negligible. Is there anything that you can do to hold companies or organisations accountable? Yeah, doing like a public hanging or something, which
I mean, so to respond to the first question on, could there potentially be a mass exodus of practices from RIBA? Maybe, but I personally don't really see it. I personally don't really see it happening. And the reason I say that is because I've talked to a number of people from managerial positions in practice, and a surprisingly common complaint that I heard was that the standards of chartered practice are too low of a bar, and so it means that it doesn't actually mean that much for you to call yourself a chartered practice. So paradoxically, there could almost be a greater appeal of becoming chartered if it means more. So like if chartered practices are held to a significantly higher standard, then there is a potential that more practices would be interested in it, just in terms of having it as almost something that represents the standard that they hold themselves to. So yeah, I suppose with that one, at the end of the day, I don't really know, but my suspicion is that I don't think there's going to be a mass exodus of practices.
I suppose like chartered practice as well, it's around the perceived value of sort of forward facing for a client as well, that they've got the logo underneath, and you'd think as a sort of Joe Blogs that there's an association there that means that means something special. So yeah, it really see which way it goes.
Yeah. And in terms of sort of like holding people accountable, when it comes to chartered practices, we've got REBA to agree to improve on their accountability measures. So they're going to, at the moment, it's essentially an email address. So like if you have a complaint, you send something to an email address, but they're working to build it out into a sort of full web page that goes through the complaints process, to have better protection for sort of whistleblowing, more safeguarding for people who want to remain anonymous, that kind of thing. So within chartered practice, I hopefully that will be the best way of keeping people accountable. Outside of chartered practice, it's a more interesting question, because my sort of natural instinct is just to take it upon myself and just sort of create the like like a faff like rating of every practice or something, but then you get into like legal trouble. You'll get sent a cease and desist, that kind of thing. So plus also you need the framework to like validate that people have worked places, that kind of stuff. So that's sort of an ongoing question that we have as well, to be honest. And we are sort of like brainstorming some things in collaboration with UVW SAW, the Architects Union. So there could potentially be something in the works between us and them going forwards in terms of some kind of non-REBA independent sort of accountability group or something, but that's very much up in the air at the moment. But hopefully we might be able to develop something like that.
That sounds really interesting. Yeah. I don't know if anyone else wanted to ask a question. I'm very conscious that I'm getting really excited about all the things I wanted to ask you personally, so I should probably shut up. Anyone else want to chip in? No, fine.
No, I was gonna say. I mean, I really was hoping that Tegan and Kyle actually gonna grill Charlie even more, because you're like literally just fresh out of the oven. I did my part to 2017. So there's one question that I was thinking of leaving to the end, but let's do it first, and then guys, maybe you can do it. And I think that was the question of where you've got support from senior management, older generation professionals, and other practices, or they're afraid that it's only going to affect their bottom lines. And for me, where there is an interesting thing is that you've really tapped into something which is basically a collective trauma. Everybody's just gone through this process. Everybody has PTSD. And I think at this stage of an architectural assistant, you probably still have not dealt with it, if that makes sense, if you haven't buried it away. So you're still willing to kind of talk about it. Do you think maybe if you've had support or not, has that come up in those sort of older generations experiences? And is it a question of sort of, we've already been through this, we've internalized it, and now that's what it is, so deal with it. I don't know, it'd been really interesting to hear what you think. And also how you're going to actually maintain that collection of information about people's experiences and learn from it, and actually let the profession learn from it as well.
Yeah, I mean, in terms of the future of those collection of experiences we have, they're within the letter, and they'll always be online in some form. But we are in the process of building our own website, and so we're hoping that there will be a space on our website to sort of suppose like archive these stories and maybe add to them over time. And it could be an interesting sort of not at all scientific but interesting way of taking the temperature of the profession, it purely anecdotally based, but it's something, it's interesting. And yeah, I think in terms of, was your other question about how older?
Have you received any support from sort of older generations in
Yeah.
senior management?
We've had some, but I mean, not much. You know, we've been contacted by Sarah Wigglesworth Architects. We've been contacted by oh, if anyone else is watching me forget their names right now, I'm going to feel really bad. But there have been some more senior people who have kind of expressed, you know, sort of solidarity with what we're doing. But it's definitely not common. You know, 99% of all the people I interact with and talk to regarding FAF are in their 20s and 30s. So the response from like heads of practice and not directly with us, but like Arup recently released something about the AJ investigation that was sort of prompted by what we've done. So you know, there's here and there, there's little like glimmers of awareness, but mostly it's kind of been not much really. But who knows, in the future could change.
Okay, I've got a question from someone in the audience then, which is, who is FAF really? What's the background of the people behind it? You're clearly the face of it, Charlie. And this is actually from a bit more of like a diversity perspective, because no offense, but you're another white man telling us about architecture. And obviously one of your outcomes is to have more representation. So kind of, do you have a more diverse team or anything?
Yeah, I mean, so I feel like I'm between a rock and a hard place here, because either I say no or I say yes, and then I start to explain how I'm like my group is super diverse, which sounds a bit fake. But I suppose I can tell you a little bit about the other people who are sort of publicly involved with FAF. So the sort of, from the beginning, it's been it started with me and a colleague from Cambridge, Priti Mohandas. And so, you know, the two sort of like founders are myself and an Indian woman, and the rest of the group, you know, I'm not going to drop any names because the nature of what we do means that a lot of the people who make up FAF are sort of intentionally anonymous. But it is, I mean, Simeon, you've met a lot of us. It's mostly women, I think.
Yeah.
And yeah, so I mean, I think that there's a good level of representation in FAF. Obviously, it's difficult. You kind of have to just take my word on it, because I think the only public members are Priti and myself. I don't think anyone else has sort of outwardly talked about being involved with us. But that was something that I was very aware of when sort of choosing who to bring on as collaborators and as you know, people who are going to sort of help us develop our strategies and our way forwards. And maybe in the near future, some of those people will sort of you know, poke their heads up and say hello, and then hopefully I'll be vindicated in some way.
Sorry for attacking you a bit on that one.
No, you know, it's an important topic. Like it's yeah, you know, it would be, you know, if that hadn't been part of how we'd formed the group, it would be an enormous blind spot. So I am glad to like have an opportunity to address it, because it's definitely something that I've been aware of. You know, whenever I say throughout the campaign, it always feels like I'm talking about ages ago, but like throughout 2 months ago to now.
Well, we're all very grateful for you taking one for the team and sort of having the public face as the one that's sort of having your headshot spread over everywhere, and hopefully there aren't any major repercussions for you in your career. But hopefully,
the benefit of not having a boss. Don't have to worry about any of that.
So I've got another question. So do you think there's more that could be done at a kind of university level? I know that when people are leaving kind of their undergrad after completing 3 years and looking for a year out, if you aren't struggling to find work in the first place, then that transition from university to kind of year out can be really quite difficult for some. And then once you're even getting through that, I know from my experience that when it comes to kind of filling out the PEDRs and stuff, it can feel quite alone. And I think you have kind of universities even asking you for money, and then even more money to sign sheets if you're looking for a student advisor. And I think it can be, like I say, really isolating and really kind of, just difficult to kind of show your experience or even get good experience because university hasn't necessarily prepared them for things. I'm just wondering if that is something that maybe you could push the RIBA to do, because of course they accredit the university courses and stuff.
Yeah. The financial burden of qualifying is extreme. And things like little things like PEDR fees, Part 3 fees, these things, they mount really quickly, and essentially they sort of operate as a kind of income-based gatekeeping mechanism for the profession. So I think it's really important to interrogate that a lot more. And in terms of the RIBA, our approach in terms of getting them to talk about that is sort of to look at their spending as an institute, as a body. Why do they have people, if you go on their charity page, why are they paying people over £300,000 a year? Why, there's some questions to be answered about how they're allocating their resources as a charity. And I, for one, personally think that they should be putting a lot more money into supporting the most vulnerable parts of the profession. So, that's one thing that I think RIBA should be doing financially. When it comes to the question of universities, I think the RIBA potentially have a role in that, but at the same time, I think you come back to the question of other institutes and their responsibility. So like SCOSA, the head of the schools of architecture, what is their approach to this? Like, what is their stance on the huge amount of fees that students are having to pay? So something that we are going to be doing in the future is, not just looking at RIBA, not just talking about RIBA, but also looking at these other institutes and starting to sort of try to turn the heat up on them a little bit on these issues. And hopefully that might mean that we can get to a point where we can address these larger, more complex inter-institutional problems. But yeah, I hope that answered your question.
Yeah, it has answered my question to some degree. I think over the past year with the pandemic and of course COVID, it's affected a lot of people. I've seen stories about people being furloughed and asked to work and things. I'm just wondering then, kind of with your experience and obviously knowledge of working on this, how do you think COVID has kind of exacerbated the issues that we're now talking about, and are they going to get worse? Or is it actually, maybe it's now the perfect time because so many people are frustrated, maybe because of COVID? Just wondering how you think, if they've exacerbated and if we're gonna recover from them.
Yeah, it's a little bit of a double-edged sword because things certainly are a lot worse because of COVID. but at the same time, you know, in every now and then when I see someone sort of dismiss the things we're talking about, I very often see them use COVID as an opportunity to kind of like hand wave these issues away, as if, you know, they were caused and you know, like only now have they got to a point where everything's bad. So I think it's important to look at COVID within the context of the history of the profession. Yes, it's made things worse, but were things okay beforehand? No. So, but the you know, the other side of that is that I think in many ways COVID has kind of catalyzed this reaction, because, you know, I don't know if the campaigning we've done would have been anywhere near as effective if people weren't locked inside all day with nothing to do except think. So, you know, there's also that side of things where the lockdown could have could have acted as a sort of like straw that broke the camel's back in a lot of ways. So there's kind of like two sides, I think, when we look at the role of COVID in all this.
Thanks. Brilliant.
Like, just been thinking, there's been so many questions coming in, so there's apologies with no way we're going to be able to get through all of them, but maybe we'll try and answer them afterwards. But there's been quite a lot of talk around the ideas of the value of a part one when you're graduating. So for me, I'm old, so I finished my part one in 2012, so it's been a while. But like, leaving education with what people would in practice would call sort of usable skills that they can actually take from you, rather than this sort of moulding of, I mean, you sort of get 5 years of education on and off of being this like really adventurous designer and really pushing your creativity, and then immediately getting shut down and having your wings clipped of just being some like CAD monkey that's churning out dozens of plans. And that's not the case for everyone. It totally depends on your experience and where you've ended up working. Personally, I went on to a graduate scheme, and it was really valuable because I was working for a housing developer. So I then got to go onto a construction site for 3 or 4 months and be an assistant site manager. And that kind of exposure would never have happened had you been on the architect side purely. I suppose I'm trying to sort of, I know you're potentially talking with unis, or that's like the next few steps ahead. It's sort of looking at the value of people, and is there a way that we can help not just part ones but part twos and like part threes as well. I'm still doing my part three. I'm not qualified yet. Of seeing that they have worth and they can add value to the company beyond just like the only person in the company that can use Revit.
Yeah. I mean, I think the big, like, my interpretation of the problem between education and practice is that the education of architecture is very qualitative. It's very much about, you know, the method doesn't matter. There's no like sort of numerical deliverables. It's all about just like creating the highest quality piece of work. And then you transition to practice, which is fundamentally quantitative. It's all about, you know, units of housing, having financially viable buildings. You have to start talking to quantity surveyors. Like, it's, you know, it's all of these things are, for someone who's only been used to architectural education, it's a completely contradictory way of thinking in many ways, apart from maybe the fact that it's to do with design and there are deadlines. Like, those are probably the only two things really you have in common. So I think that's kind of the biggest disconnect. And I think what universities could be doing a lot more is revealing new pathways that students can take to, you know, to utilize their education outside of traditional practice. But you know, since starting FAF, I've spoken to people who have become design managers. I've spoken to people who've gone into fashion. I've spoken to people who have, you know, gone into like doing PhDs in social sciences, and you know, they achieved all that through an architecture degree. And I think that is really something that could be looked at in a lot more detail within a university context. So that, yeah, I think that would be potentially one way forwards of, you know, showing students their value beyond the architect, the architect conveyor belt, if you will.
Yeah, there does seem to be like you say, a massive disconnect, and we've probably all felt it to some level, where you suddenly get released and you go, oh God, I've only had like an hour's worth of formal AutoCAD training, and you just teach it yourself on the course desperately.
Yeah.
Really difficult, and I think that groups like Future Architects Network can do an awful lot to help support students through that and try and transition, because I know the education team at REBA is one of the smallest in the system, which is mad really. But I suppose that there's, like you said, there's other ways that could potentially help into play. So like doing part-time courses where you're sort of part working, part learning, where you can sort of each can sort of give to the other, of sort of sharing knowledge and helping your own learning. And I know a lot of professionals and practices are always going to be looking for the person with the experience rather than the award-winning design, unfortunately, and that's sort of that disconnect there again. So have you had any discussions around like apprenticeships or sort of level 6, 7, sort of I know there's quite a few schemes around bringing in sort of higher education from A levels of BTEC into Part 1 transition. Has that been something that you've considered?
Yeah, I think it's something that we have spoken about with REBA, but I think that's one of those topics that in many ways is sort of above and beyond their remit. So I think that is something that will need to be tied into, you know, our sort of like next kind of focus, which will be universities and education. Because yeah, I think with REBA, I think the only way they could kind of try to address that is maybe if they were to stop accrediting like traditional university structures, and like were to start accrediting like universities that used apprenticeship schemes or kind of alternative models like the London School of Architecture. That could be a way that REBA would address it, but you know, I think that it's something that will need to be spearheaded by the universities primarily. I think that's my sort of suspicion, at least, but we'll see when we fully dive into that topic.
Look forward to it. Digga, did you want to?
Yeah. So I think just as like a closing question, how can we support FAF? What can we do? Someone's asked if there's a donation box. Obviously, like a lot of us have probably already signed the open letter. But yeah, what's next that we can do, and what does the future look like?
Yeah. So we do have a donation link in our Twitter and Instagram. We have a link tree, and there's an option within that to support us. That helps in terms of we're in the process of building a website. We want to be relatively ambitious about the things that we can build in terms of online resources and sort of, you know, producing more as a group. So yeah, any sort of support there would help a huge amount. Also, yeah, I think you know, beyond that, it's just sort of engaging, you know, with what we're doing is really the thing that helps the most. You know, every time someone tells a friend, like, because essentially, you know, we are a grassroots organization, and so our entire strength comes from the number of people who engage with what we do. So the best thing that people can do is, like I said, engage with it and sort of share it with people who you think should care about this conversation. And yeah, in terms of the future, like, I think it's a really exciting time because we're a very, very young organization in this group. But like I said, you've got groups like ACAN, you've got UVW SOAR, you have all of these grassroots organizations whose presence and influence in the profession is growing at a really rapid rate, and it makes me very optimistic for the future to see, you know, all of these different grassroots organizations sort of, you know, thriving at the moment, and really taking advantage of the kind of, you know, these sort of online spaces and events. So yeah, and yeah, we're best way to keep track of what we're doing is to follow fa.front on Instagram.
Thanks so much, Charlie. I just want to, like, one final sort of question, then I'll just send you all the praise. But have REBA given any kind of actual commitment to timescales? I know that they said at some point in the next 6 months-ish if they vote on it, but does that then mean they've got to do another vote? Is it, like, what's the kind of...
So in terms of the topic of overtime, deciding if they're going to make the compact, which is a sort of more clear agreement between practice, university, and student, mandatory, and another issue that we raised with them was adopting the inclusion charter into the standards of professional practice, because right now it's just an optional thing that you can opt in for. Those three things will have to be brought to the REBA board and decided on by September of this year. So by then we will have a definite decision on if these things are going, if these things become policy or if they are not going to become policy. So we're going to have action one way or another before September. So that's the time frame for that. And then when it comes to things like building and improving their accountability mechanisms on the website and you know, increasing student access to things like employment policy information, those will probably happen more quickly. And we've set up a sort of like rolling meeting schedule with them. So we're going to be meeting with REBA again in early, within the next week, I think, actually. And so that's another channel through which we can sort of keep the pressure up, because they'll have to see us face to face fairly regularly, so they can't ignore us even if they want to.
Can't go pretending that, oh, I'm too busy. No, Zoom's there for everyone. Yeah,
exactly. Yeah.
I'm really glad to hear that there are actually sort of they've committed to at least some deadlines, even if it's a no. Hopefully not, but if it is a no, then I expect some burning pitchforks to be outside the building to sort some stuff out. So
that's when we go to Simeon's plan B of burn it all down.
This was never plan B. This is always plan A.
arson or violence.
Yeah, for legal clarification.
It's so bad. No.
I just want to say thanks again so much, Charlie. We're so glad to have been able to have this conversation with you. And we've had, like I said before, we've got so many questions that we're probably going to send some over to you to try and help you guys get some understanding of what the community is wanting from you and asking and sort of feedback as well. So I'm sure that would be really helpful for your campaign. And it's really promising that everyone that's actioning and getting involved right now, so after seeing Simeon's cat in his background and it's completely distracting me, poor cat, sorry Simeon. It's just really enthusiastic that you've got this whole group of people that at some point, always turn this camera off completely, it's fine. At some point in the future are going to be business owners, we're going to be the directors, the associates, who are going to be hiring the people ourselves, and hopefully it's just another case of breaking the sort of cyclical chain of this sort of inherited trauma that well, I do, so you do as well. Feels like this might actually be the time that something across the industry actually happens.
Yeah, I certainly hope so. You know, I think the very worst thing we can do is you know, become that sort of like jaded Dazine comments kind of you know, middle-aged person who you know, just kind of like writes everything off as, oh, this is the way it's always been, da 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 da. So I think maintaining sort of hope for things becoming more equitable is kind of our, you know, first responsibility in doing this kind of work.
I'm really glad to hear that, and hopefully we don't all become jaded and
start commenting in Dazine articles.
Yeah. Started writing, getting shouty and angry at all the young people. Thank you very much again, Charlie, and thanks to Simeon, Tegan and Kyle, and obviously all the BAA committee and everyone that's joined tonight. I just want to say thanks to our sponsors, our patron Designer Muir, and we've also got All Good, Outro, Ibstock Brick, Kitchen Gallery, Milliken, Rainers and Taylor Maxwell, who have made tonight possible and all our artwork and everything online. Do check us out on social media, and if you want to listen to this again or you want to share it with your colleagues or your peers, then the recording will be on our website in the next week. So I just want to say thanks very much again, and good luck and keep fighting the good fight. See you.
Thank you.
Bye guys.